Joining me now is Dominic LeBlanc, the minister responsible for U.S.-Canada trade, who had been leading the Canadian side of the recent trade negotiations. We're so glad that you're with us today. Thank you for being here. I'd like to start with these retaliatory dollar-for-dollar tariffs on the U.S. Canada is calling this a proportional response. But on the tariffs, Canada faces a much more significant impact because your economy is smaller than the U.S. economy. It's $32 trillion on the U.S. side, which is 13 times bigger than Canada's. So what I'm trying to get at here is, can Canada win a trade war against the United States?
Kelly, we'll see the judgment over the next number of weeks. But for us, it's not about winning a trade war. It's about protecting Canadian industries and Canadian workers that are suddenly facing an additional wave of 50% tariffs that President Trump imposed on the weekend. We had been clear publicly and with our American counterparts that if we weren't able to get to an agreement, Canadians expected the government of Canada to take the steps necessary to protect those very industries that President Trump has decided to tariff in terms of our exports to the United States. So you can imagine what President Trump would have done in a similar situation. He would have had a firm response. Canadians expect the government of Canada to do the same thing. But all of this is regrettable and, in our view, unnecessary in the sense that we started the position with a free trade agreement, the USMCA, that President Trump had negotiated in his first term. We had built over decades an economy very much integrated with the United States. We thought it's in the economic interest of both countries and still believe that that's the case. But if the United States is doing this to Canadian workers and Canadian businesses, and the government of Canada has a responsibility to take what steps we can to protect them.
One of the things I'd like to drill down on is that there are potentially 100,000 Canadian jobs that could be lost because of U.S. tariffs, and the GDP would take a hit. What is it about this that you think is worse than what had been talked about when these talks fell apart?
So when the talks fell apart on Friday last week, we were facing the threat under Section 338 of these 50% tariffs on a basket of about 28 billion Canadian dollars of exports. That's in addition, Kelly, to the Section 232 tariffs, which the United States government applied to steel, aluminum, automobile producers, in our case, the softwood lumber industry. So all of these sectors of our economy that had become progressively over decades, as I said, more integrated with the United States in a very positive way to make North America more competitive, we're suddenly facing these suite of American tariffs. So the circumstance is such that the government of Canada decided, in terms of retaliatory tariffs, sure, to do what we can to try and protect these sectors of our economy. We also announced a series of support measures for businesses and workers who, as you said, might be facing layoffs, businesses that are suddenly facing huge financial headwinds through no fault of their own. This is a circumstance that the United States government has created. Canadians expect their national government to stand up and try and defend them in every way possible. That's what we're doing.
One of the levers that Canada has does deal with energy, and Ontario's Premier Doug Ford has floated the idea of limiting Canadian energy and critical minerals to the U.S. Do you believe that's something that should be done now?
No.
This would have a big impact on Americans.
Yeah, but we're not, Kelly, we're not looking to escalate this circumstance. As I said, we're doing what any sovereign country would do faced with this economic threat, is take the measures necessary to protect our own economy. We're diversifying our trading relationships with other partners. We're developing big critical mineral projects, infrastructure in Canada to better allow us to trade with Europe or partners in Asia. All of that, Prime Minister Carney was elected last year to do as the government of Canada. we think, and we still believe, that there is an opportunity to have an agreement, to reach an agreement that is in the economic interest of both countries, that respects the sovereignty of Canada, but continues to collaborate with the American economy and American businesses, for example, around non-market economies entering in the steel or aluminum sector, melt and pour rules around steel, all of which we are doing now, which we think is complementary to measures taken by President Trump. So we remain convinced that in spite of the 232 tariffs, which Mr. Trump imposed a year ago, there is an opportunity to find a way for the Canadian economy to be competitive and economic, while accepting that President Trump has redefined his trading relationships with countries around the world. So we're always ready to do what's necessary to get to that arrangement. But in the meantime, as you said in the introduction, the potential economic impact in Canada is serious, and Canadians are really concerned about this. There's a real sense in the Canadian population of concern. For decades, we've collaborated in security areas, in defense, in building a North American economy with the United States that we think has benefited both countries. So we look forward to the day when we can do that collaboratively with the United States.
And what I hear from you is that this is a situation you called regrettable, and that has really come through in each of your answers. And at the same time, you're very clear about you have planted that maple leaf flag firmly behind you in terms of standing up for Canada. What is the snapshot of this moment? Where do talks stand? Is there a way forward?
We always believe there's a way forward. Our exchanges, our work with Ambassador Greer was cordial, was constructive. We all approached these conversations in good faith. At the end of the day on Friday, Prime Minister Carney concluded that we weren't able to reach an agreement that was in the economic interest of our country. If certain sectors of our economy were facing 232 tariffs that created a circumstance where there was an uneven playing field, you can't ask the Prime Minister of Canada to agree to something that would make our auto industry over time less competitive, or the steel or aluminum industry, critical parts of our economy, exactly as President Trump has defined in the United States. So there are no negotiations at the present moment. We're going on with taking the measures necessary to build our own economy, to build a strong Canadian economy, which we think is in the interest of the United States. A strong Canadian economy with big natural resource projects, you referred to energy, should benefit both countries.
So no negotiations right now. Is this Canada adopting some of the tactics of Trump in the Trump era, where he takes these aggressive tariff postures? Is that part of what we're seeing from your government?
I wouldn't say that we're copying President Trump's aggressive tactics. What we're doing is what Mr. Carney, what the Prime Minister said any sovereign country would do faced with this economic threat, is take the measures that are necessary to defend and support our industries. But that is not contradictory with the view that there is an agreement that wasn't in the line of sight on Friday evening, but there is an agreement that we think can be reached that will strengthen both economies, will make North America more competitive facing threats from other parts of the world. But in the meantime, as I said, we're not waiting by the phone. What we're doing is what any responsible national government would do, is take the steps necessary to support workers and businesses in our country and try and diversify our trading opportunities with other countries around the world.
You've been speaking in certainly diplomatic tones. You have talked about the practical and the possible here. Doug Ford has also used some of the language that is more pugilistic in this political moment, calling President Trump a loser, a dictator, a bully. Is that something that is constructive in this moment?
We have 13 premiers in Canada. They're the equivalent of the 50 governors in the United States. They speak for their own citizens and in their own way. Premier Ford has his own style. Prime Minister Carney speaks for the government of Canada. We don't think that President Trump would be responsible for what the 50 state governors in the United States might say in a given week. But what Premier Ford, I think, is showing is the real sense of frustration and concern that Ontario businesses and industries are facing in terms of these latest tariffs imposed over the weekend. And Prime Minister Carney has also been very clear that we're going to work with the 13 provincial and territorial premiers across Canada as they look at different sectors of their economy that will need specific measures to be able to get through this economic headwind that we weren't seeking.
And in our final moments here, it really seems that you have reflected the long relationship that Canada and the United States have had. You referred to North American prosperity. Is trust broken between the U.S. and Canada because of this kind of dispute?
I wouldn't be that stark. This is a relationship between two countries that has been successful and has been extremely close for decades. There's not one Canadian that doesn't have some personal connection to the United States. It's often studying there. In my case, I went to university there. People have cousins and family members that live there. They go on a holiday there. They do business with the Americans. This is a well-worn path of a relationship that has survived challenges before. At the end of the day, we have to build an economy in Canada that's resilient and strong. That's what we're going to do. But none of that should be seen as contradictory to working with our most important ally in building an economy that can be competitive for two countries. And in the case of USMCA, that would include Mexico as well.
After all, the U.S. and Canada are neighbors, and we are deeply interested in where this goes next. Minister LeBlanc, we thank you for your time and your expertise today.
Well, you're very kind for having me on the program. Thanks very much.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.